Hello and welcome everybody to another episode of Pod Strickland. I'm your host, Shwin and in this episode 481. I'm joined, as always, by my co-host Stacy. That is at Stacy Patton89 on Twitter. Stacy, how are you doing on this very belated this week edition of the pod on Thursday morning? How are you doing?
Doing all right. Getting ready. Covering from two games in a row, back to back. So
yes,
played a lot of minutes.
Played a lot of minutes. We all did.
Lost a lot of good men out there.
Well, we are. We'll talk about all of those things and more. But before we do that, I do have to make a few announcements. First, being that Strickland has a YouTube channel where you may watch this podcast. If you are not done so already, please hit like, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment. It'd be a huge help to us. Strickland also has merchandise, which you can find on our website at www.strict.land. There's a link to take you to merchandise store. There's all kinds of cool stuff that you can find on there, like t-shirts, sweatshirts, hats, coffee mugs, water bottles. You name it, we've got it. The Strickland also has a Patreon, which you can subscribe to. There are a number of different tiers. There's a $6 tier that gets you access to Pod Strickland's podcast that is every Friday with Perez. You also get access to Takes My Beers Bozos, a podcast hosted by Andrew Steele, a.k.a. Doug, along with Zach Platter. And you get access to the Strickland Discord where the conversation never stops. So at further tiers, there's a $9 tier that gets you access to Strickland Roll, my solo pod where I rant and rave at the Knicks even more. You also get access to wonderful premium articles by Matthew Marino, one of the best in business. And you get access to Strickland NFL, which you guessed it is podcast by the NFL that is hosted by Constantine Metricos and Desmond Novak. There are further tiers. It's $15 tier, $30 tier, $50 tier, and $100 tier. Let's go with a variety of additional benefits, like listening on our part recordings and merchandise discounts, even potentially hosting a podcast alongside yours truly one day, whether you choose to subscribe or not. None of this would be possible without you. And none of this would be possible without BetOnline. BetOnline is the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for betting on all the madness. Whether you're a seasoned fan or a first-time bettor, BetOnline is your ultimate game day companion with a large selection of odds on everything from college basketball to a $200,000 bracket contest. BetOnline continues to be your number one sports betting source. From every Cinderella story to every hat trick, BetOnline has you covered with odds, stats, and more for every game, every play, and every win. BetOnline, the game starts here. So, look, we all watched the game last night. They played the Clippers. I thought the Knicks played pretty hard. I think they ran out of gas. They ran out of bodies. What it is, I don't envision there are many universes. Maybe Doctor Strange could help us out in which the Knicks were going to win that game last night, given the circumstances. That being said, I think what kind of stood out to me, not even just from last night, but how I felt now for a while, is there's just an inherent sense of, like, we're not learning anything about this team at this point. Everything that we are seeing game to game, regardless of who's in, who's out, these are things that we already knew. Like, the only thing we are basically getting information on right now is Tyler Kolek's viability as an NBA player. But there's no attempt of, let's work on this thing that could come in handy in the playoffs. Let's try this coverage. Let's run this play that we have not done before. Let's use this player in this way. There is nothing happening that is new, that is even attempting to find a solution to a problem that has presented itself. And this has been the case almost all season. We're still getting Precious at the 4 minutes. Like, and yeah, maybe last night, if you want to tell me it's because, Campaign got hurt and blah, blah. You were playing Precious at the 4 before Campaign was out of the game. That's actually the most minutes he played at the 4 last night. I think he played all of his minutes at the 4 last night, if I'm not mistaken. There is no attempt ever to throw a lineup out there that you haven't really used before to see what it looks like. There's not even an attempt to play with 4 shooters at all times. There's not an attempt. How often do we play 5 out, actually? I don't know. We have Karl-Anthony Towns. We barely try to play 5 out, even at full strength. We just don't do it. There has been no experimentation. The starting lineup, I'm talking about the when we're healthy starting lineup. That starting lineup has been played, I think, something like 800 plus minutes at this point. They're okay. It's like a +2 or 3 net rating, some shit like that. Doesn't really matter. It's a very okay starting lineup. What other coach in the fucking league would just be like, well, that's good enough for me? Like, there's no logic to this. There's nothing that's happening with this team that's fresh, that is an attempt at finding a solution or improving things. There has been no attempt all season. There has been none. This has been, to me, just a thoroughly unimaginative, uncreative, unproductive in many ways season. And this is the first time I can say that since the 2021-22 season. And even in that case, at least you were like, well, look, at least you're still down the stretch. You're getting a chance to see Emmanuel quickly play more minutes, Obi Toppin play more minutes, RJ Barrett. Obviously, at that point, he's still progressing and he's playing a ton of minutes. Grimes comes in the fold. Deuce gets some chances. Like, you were at least seeing some of these young guys come in. We're not even getting that. The only reason, like, the fucking argument that I've had with people, like, that I see from people, which is like not, I don't know. I have not been some like, oh my God, I can't believe Tyler Kolek hasn't played this season. This is a disgrace. Fucking, we need to get a congressional commission. Not that congressional commissions do anything anymore because they apparently don't do anything. We need to have an inquiry into this. I know. I've just been like, I've understood why he hasn't played for the most part. What other fucking coach in the league would literally have never given this guy a chance for like since, I don't know, November, basically? He played one game basically since November. And I'm talking about actual minutes, not garbage time. Real minutes. It was against Utah on New Year's Day. He played well. Had a good game. Knicks win the game. He's put on ice. He doesn't play at all. He doesn't play any serious minutes again until Jalen Brunson gets hurt, right? And then on top of that, it required like Deuce McBride to get hurt for Kolek to get a real fucking chance again. And the argument I see from people is like, well, when would he have played? And I'm like, the minute Jalen Brunson went down, he should have been in the rotation. That like this, the entire, and then it's always like these fucking brain dead arguments of like, well, if you don't play Precious, you're not going to have good size on the floor. It's like, who gives a fuck about size if Precious fucking sucks? Like, great, he's a big guy. He fucking sucks at the fucking sport. Like, he's terrible at the fucking sport, especially at the 4. At the 5, I can at least see, like, I mean, we've talked about, like, there are moments where Precious at the 5 is actually a nice situational look. But again, we have a coach who almost never tries anything situationally until there's like 3 minutes left in a fucking ball game and you're down 8. Otherwise, it's nope, I'm just going to play the guys that I like, the lineups that I think are the best. And I don't care what the damn, fuck the data. God damn it all. I don't care about it. Doesn't matter. Like, it just, I don't get it at all. It's so frustrating. And what dawned on me during all of this last night, as I'm frustrated about the same things that I've been frustrated about for 72 games this season, because it just feels like I'm watching the same fucking thing 72 games, regardless of who is healthy and who is not healthy and whatever. You just get the same fucking, like, the same kind of set rotations and these absurd, stupid fucking moments where you're like, oh, we just played all of our, like, 4 of our starters the first 12 minutes. So I know the next 5 minutes of the second quarter, the first 5 minutes of the second quarter, are going to be some fucking brain dead, bird brain ass fucking lineup, which is exactly what happened last night. Like, he was literally about to start the fucking second quarter with Josh Hart, Precious Achiuwa, and Mitchell Robinson as the front court, with Kolek, that was going to be his first minute of the game, and Shamet as the backcourt. Like, he got bailed out, one, because Josh Hart gets a foul on the first possession, so Mikal Bridges has to come back in. So at least you have some modicum of spacing there, and kudos to Kolek and the rest of that lineup for, at least in that moment, keeping things together. But, like, why would you ever have you went into the game, okay? Think about this. He went into the game being like, yeah, this is going to be the lineup that I start with the second quarter. Why the fuck would that ever be your lineup? Why the fuck would that ever be your lineup to start the second quarter? Like, your fucking master plan to start the second quarter against a really good Clippers team, by the way, a team that's also very hot. Like, your master plan was to have an entire front court, 3 guys, who either can't shoot, won't shoot, or shouldn't fucking shoot. Like, it is so stupid that this is actually like what shit people like. People defend this stuff, and they'll be like, "Oh, well, what do you want them to do? Fucking try anything." Like, you're allowed to pull. Like, oh, you know what? The first quarter is going well. Okay, why don't you take out put in Landry Shamet for Mikal Bridges early? Do that, and then you can put Mikal Bridges in for Josh Hart to start the second quarter, which he ended up having to do because of a foul trouble, but not because he intended to. At least have a plan so that if you're gonna roll out this fucking this dog shit precious Mitchell Robinson lineup out there, which, okay, fine, if you want to argue you had to do it because you're so shorthanded, I'm never gonna agree with this stuff, but especially given the minutes totals he's playing, guys, I think it's ridiculous to suggest that he has to play Precious at the four some. But if you're gonna do that, then at least put a guy that can shoot at the three, and it's like, this is the stuff that he does, and then people if he let me throw this at you. If Josh Hart doesn't pick up the foul, right, and so that's the lineup that goes out there. It's Kolek, Shamet, Hart, Precious, Mitchell Robinson. Let's say they played the same 5.5 minutes or whatever the hell it was that lineup with Mikal ended up playing. Do you think there's any chance that lineup scores at even a reasonable rate? Is there any way that Tyler Kolek, as a rookie guard who has just been inserted into playing in the actual rotation again, is there any chance he can be successful? I don't see the world where he can be successful. And again, all of this just concludes to me believing and feeling. I feel an utter sense of boredom watching this team, not because the talent isn't good or there's not they're incapable of exciting plays or anything like that, but I'm bored by the entire process. It is leading to nowhere. There's zero. I will say this: there is zero fucking chance that, as it stands, this Knicks team is beating Cleveland or Boston in a playoff series. No shot. And but again, people will be like, "Well, if you didn't think they were going to beat either of those teams anyway." Yeah, but there's a way where I might not think you're going to beat those teams, but I could at least talk myself into maybe there's a shot, there's a chance. What fucking chance do you have when the fucking coach is just yeah, I'm going to punt on ever having 5 out. I'm going to use Precious at the 4. I don't care that the starting lineup isn't actually that good. I don't give a fuck what the good lineups are because they're too small because I got my fucking measuring tape out and I checked that Deuce McBride and Jalen Brunson don't hit the height requirements I like in a starting backcourt. And it's all fucking bullshit. It's just a fucking bullshit coaching job this year. He's not trying. He's not trying. That's all I can say. He's literally, to me, not trying this season. I mean, you're talking about a guy. So the last 2 possessions of the first half, I'm just going to end with this because this just blew my fucking mind. Last 2 possessions of the first half defensively, the Knicks are up 50, whatever. They're up whatever. It doesn't really matter. Last 2 possessions, the Clippers come down. They're hunting cat, right? They're all right, we know what's going to happen here. The first possession, they're playing drop. I think the Knicks actually covered it pretty well. But OG has to fight over a screen. He can't quite close out the airspace, and Harden's able to make it's not an easy 3. It's a pretty tough 3, but it's one that he had a little space on. Okay, next possession down. They again go into a high pick and roll. Cat, who we know is bad, awful in drop, is playing drop. Now, his positioning is terrible here. Okay, I want to be very clear about this. His positioning in this situation is terrible. So you want to put blame on him for that? That is totally fair, above board, whatever, however you want to phrase it. Have a field day. Why the fuck are you playing drop there? It's the last possession and a half. I think there was 8 seconds or something like that on the shot clock, or on the game clock, if I'm not mistaken, when they were bringing the ball up. Just fucking switch everything. Just fucking switch everything. And this goes back, so Harden is able to score, obviously. But this is the same, why do you have to learn these lessons all the time? And are they being learned if you see the same mistakes over and over again? This goes back to that game 5 against fucking Philly, where at the end of the game, you're up 6 with, I don't even remember how much time there's left. Why on earth are you leave Mitchell Robinson in and you have him in fucking drop against Tyrese Maxey? Like, they're only going to shoot threes there. Switch everything, force them to fucking drive. Like, it's just, it drives me absolutely nuts watching this team this year. And it has honestly very little to do with the players at this point, because I don't think they are being used at all, or being even attempted to being used at all in their best situations across the board. I don't know a single guy you could look at on this team right now and be like, this guy is being put in the best position to be the best version of himself, and not just be the best version of himself, but also in doing so, elevating the team, helping boost the team. I don't know that there's a single player you can say that about. And that to me is entirely on Tom Thibodeau. And like, do I think Tom Thibodeau is a fucking moron? No, I don't. I think he's a good. I think he's a good coach. Like, I don't. I will. I'm not going to sit here and tell you he's a terrible coach. I think he's having a terrible coaching season, and I think it all ties to he cannot deviate from what he thinks is right. Players have to adapt to him. He will do very, very little to adapt to players. He will not adapt. He will not look at the data, adjust the data. He will not accept it. It takes fucking forever, right, for him to be like, all right, I guess, well, this good thing is actually the good thing, so let me use that more. And even then, it's never clean or consistent. And it's all based on, in my opinion, his focus on, I care more about nullifying the opposition in whatever way I think is best, versus I want to impose the best version of my team over 48 minutes and make opponents adjust to what we do. That's what I think is at the core of everything about what he does. He's obsessed with control, and I don't know. I think there's a lot of stuff going on that is not great with this team, and I think most of it is at least being exacerbated by the head coach's decision making.
Yeah, I think you hit on a bunch of important points. I think when you're talking about trying different lineups, it's I think we've talked about this in the pod, but it's Daniel, right? That's how you pronounce the Oklahoma City coach's name? Daniel, or is it Daniel?
Dagnall, yeah.
Dagnall, okay. He was talking about someone. Now, I'm not going to say this is the same thing, but someone asked him earlier this year, about playing Hartenstein and Chet together. And again, I'm not saying that this is an apples to apples comparison, because that's the opposite problem, right? Can you play two bigs together? Tibbs certainly has no problem with that. And he was saying that, yeah, like, whatever the data says in a short amount of time, they're both good players. We should try to figure out how to make this work to get the most out of them. And when you were talking, when you were just talking, I was thinking about the whole Obi at the 5 next to Randall thing, and how we'd never really tried. I thought of that because you're like, until there's 3 minutes left in the game, right? Which is when he tried it in that Miami series. Literally a couple minutes left in the season.
Worked. Yeah, it worked, by the way.
Not even the game, the season, right? A couple minutes left in the season. So I think it was illustrative where you talk about the data, but there is a value also to exploration, right? I think the idea, well, he watches practice. We can say all these. I don't think Obi Randall would have worked long term, but you see what Obi Toppin's doing now, and you saw that we ended up moving on from both of them. And you saw that, look, I'm not losing sleep over this, but you saw that Obi Toppin is a fairly valuable player for the Pacers. We let go for 2 second-round picks. It is tough to argue at that point who are maximizing some of these assets. Quickly and Brunson, I get that's an undersized backcourt, right? And probably is not one you want to be playing heavy minutes in the NBA Finals. When they played well. And again, you have two good players. There is value in getting more out of them or exploring ways to make that work. Because that
Well,
gives you
it's also just as simple as like, if that's your like, okay, ideally, sure, yeah, I don't want a small backcourt, right? Fine. That everything, I think most people inherently accept that as like fine logic. But you don't have the entire fucking NBA to pick from. You have your roster. If it's your best fucking option, it's your best fucking option.
but and it also, you want as many options as possible, right? There may have been teams where they're too small. There may have been teams where actually leaning into that or creating conditions around them to make that work could have created a look that another team isn't ready for, right? And Quickly's in the past, and they did get good. I mean, he helped them get OG Anunoby, so I'm not saying that was some kind of wasted asset. But I think the more lineups you try, the more you can have different looks. Because the thing is this, right? If you look at the potential path to the finals, it's not just a question of talent. It is stylistically a question of being able to play many different ways, right? If you play Detroit, they're going to want to grind out the game. They're going to want to, they're going to be very Cade heavy. They want to slow down the pace, and they're going to make it tough on you to score, right? What are the ways to combat this? Well, you can go 5 out to spread them out. You can push the pace. You can run after makes to both maybe limit their offensive rebounding as well as get some easy baskets. You can play some weird lineups, right? If they're going to play Duren, go small and see if they're able to, if you can get them to play the game on your terms. If you try that during the season, you have more experience doing those things. You know how those lineups are going to work out. And so like I said, I understand a lot of people will say, yeah, like he doesn't try those things, but it's all about winning. He wants to win every game. We are at the point though where we're starting to think big picture, and you have less options, right? So Tyler Kolek, maybe there's most games he won't play, but the whole point of the word situational is in certain situations, you want to be able to, to go to a different look, right? If you have a Swiss Army knife, you're not going to use every single tool, and you're probably going to use 2 or 3 tools a lot of the time. We all know that, but you should still know how to use every single tool, or as many as you can. And look at the playoffs, right? So Detroit, you're playing a defensive team with really one main playmaker. It's probably going to try to grind you out. Next series, you play a 5-out team that wants to spray a bunch of threes, that's playing its best ball. Then the next series, you're playing a 2-big team, right? I mean, Mobley's shooting threes now, but he's still a big, really, that loves to move the ball, play fast, right? And then in the finals, you're playing a defensive, like one of the best defensive teams maybe ever, that can go 2 bigs, that has a huge, ball dominant guard, really, but he's 6'6", so wing-sized point guard that is playing like an MVP. And they're a defensive-minded team that can give you different looks. The point I'm making is, it's not just a question of talent. You have to be able to win in different ways. And the best way to do that is to understand those ways. But when you go into this saying, this is our best lineup, this is our lineup we do in the second quarter, this is the lineup we do, and you're not one adapting in game, but we can say that maybe Tibbs does, fine. But there is value to exploring more of the potential with this roster. And that's, I think, where the frustration comes from never playing the rookies. Yeah, you don't have to play a 10, 11-man rotation. Let's see what something looks like, right? Is there a creative way to use Kolek, right? When campaign's not playing well, or the offense is in a rut, or the guys are tired, can you get a spark from one of these guys? And when you don't try those things, and then you get to the playoffs, and maybe you have to play them, you don't have other aces in the hole. And so I'm not people will say Tibbs runs his guys into the ground, he plays too many minutes. I think beyond that, right? It's not so much just about that, but injuries happen. This year, I'm not going to put those on Tibbs, or I don't want to have that discussion. But injuries do happen. They seem to happen to the Knicks every year. They happen to lots of teams. That is the reason why not developing, right? But understanding how guys are going to react in those situations, where you can play to certain guys' strengths, and getting that film in game is really important. And I think that is, when you're looking to contend, when you're looking to build culture, identity, create an environment for guys to thrive, we've said this before, Tibbs is great at that. if you want to win a championship, though, I think these are things you need. I think you would probably agree. The coaches that win do all these things during the regular season to get ready for that, right? Even there's this Cuban once talked about the year after they beat the Heat in the finals, how they played, and this was uncommon at the time. They played an entire game during that season, during the preseason zone, right? They were very early in the season, even though it was a new philosophy, mixing in different looks. And that versatility allowed them to overcome, I think, what you and I would both agree is a talent disadvantage, right? I think the Heat were the more talented team. And those are the kinds of things you have to do. And if you want to win a championship, is Tibbs capable of that? Do I think he has that in his mind? Yes, but I think we have to understand that we're shifting to different goals from, we just need to get the fourth seed and establish a culture, or we want to create an environment where our assets can continue to develop. We're past that point, and you're just not seeing that evolution right now.
Yeah, and it's people like the defense of so many of these things is always like, well, he's just trying to win. He wants to win. Okay, like fine, he wants to win. I don't think that's really accurate. I think he wants to win, sure, like every coach wants to win. So I'm not questioning his desire to win. But he wants to win how he thinks is right. And again, damn the data, damn the numbers, damn what people think, damn what anybody else says. It's going to happen the way he wants to happen, or it's not going to happen at all. And we saw this in the 2021-22 season. Like, we had to endure an entire season of people being like, well, what do you want him to do? He doesn't have a point guard. He doesn't have that thing. He doesn't have this thing. Randall's playing like a shithead. Blah, 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 blah. And it's like, I don't know, dude. Like, maybe just play the guys that are consistently outperforming the starters. It's it. Like, play quickly more. Give Obi Toppin some chances. Maybe move Burks or Fournier to the bench. Start quickly. Like, maybe throw Grimes.
That's the thing, though, right? Like, that year, I think, is what that was the most frustrating year till now. And it was more frustrating than this year, that 2020.
I actually don't agree. I think this year's far more frustrating because
if you talk about how,
I mean, you actually had, like, like, the reason this season is really, it's become boring to me, not because the players or I'm not bored by the players. I'm bored by how they're being deployed. I'm bored by watching the same fucking games over and over and over again. I am bored watching us, when we play elite opposition, have absolutely nothing creative happening, have nothing tactically that is designed to throw some major curveball at them that they have to, again, like, these are things, you're playing great players, right? So you can throw something at them that might work for like 3 or 4 possessions. They call a timeout and they're going to be like, all right, we figured it out. We're good. But like,
you keep doing that, right?
Yeah, 3 or 4 possessions is important. But like, this is so much more frustrating to me because I think if you gave truth serum to all the head coaches and all the assistant coaches around the NBA, and you were like, one, do you think that this is the absolute best you can get out of this group of Knicks players, even with the depth issues, even with whatever, all of the things going on? Has Tibbs gotten the absolute best out of this group? And two, do you think there are coaches that could do more? I think the answer would be, one, no, Tibbs is not getting the absolute most out of this group. Two, yes, there are absolutely coaches that can get more out of this. And so we have this mountain of data that keeps telling us, for whatever reason, and look, we've already talked about why it might be, or what it could be, why the starting group is not great, and why all of a sudden you throw Deuce in there with basically in place of any of those wings, and all of a sudden those lineups are great. Like, you have this mountain of evidence climbing and showing you this. And I think another kind of interesting data point, I mean interesting, but just a true data point, the Knicks bench, right? We talked about this last year, right? And it was like, well, you made the OG trades, and now the bench is really suffering and whatnot. I think where the bench really started suffering was when Josh Hart had to move to the starting lineup. Obviously, you understand why that happened last year, right? That's, you can't do anything about it. But for the kind of like the calendar year prior to Josh Hart having to move into the starting lineup, the bench, was a massive strength for the Knicks. I mean, it was a strength before Josh Hart got there, but it became an even bigger strength after he got there. And you watch the Knicks this year, and these lineups without, these bench heavy lineups have, they've been fine as long as, they have a couple of starters mixed in, but they do struggle for, a little bit of juice, right? We're not getting scoring pop off the bench. And Josh Hart's not a great scorer, but he's like he's 10, 12 point per game type of guy. Like, you're not getting the most out of when you start Brunson, right? So when it's Brunson, Hart, Mikal, OG, Cat, look, you're a smart guy. I'm sure you've heard of the concept of diminishing returns. Like, that lineup has diminishing returns. It is not like Mikal, OG, asking Mikal, OG, Hart, Cat, and Brunson to all be the best versions of themselves together at all times, basically playing all of their fucking minutes together, it seems like. It hasn't worked. It has not worked. And I don't think that putting Deuce in that starting lineup in place of Josh Hart, for example, I don't think you're taking anything off the table. And I think you now are able to boost your bench. You're probably going to get more scoring off your bench. You're going to allow Josh Hart to thrive and have more opportunities to have the ball in his hands, which I think he needs right now because he's struggling with his confidence and the way teams are defending him. And we have seen that that is the best version of Josh Hart. Like, I love Josh Hart. I think when he starts and he starts consistently, at some point, the flaws in his game become magnified and are very problematic. And that's not, I mean, yeah, it's a Josh Hart problem, but that's what he is as a player. He's 29 years old. Like, you're not, look, if he, pulls a fucking, Jason Kidd, and I don't mean off the court, but Jason Kidd in terms of shooting and just magically becomes a good 3-point shooter moving forward and a consistent one, great, fantastic. I'm not counting on that. I think largely he is the player he is. Okay. He is a do it all type of wing who can help you with playmaking, help you on the glass, get to the rim, juice your offense in transition. He's not going to be an effective floor spacer. He's going to zone out on defense at times in ways that are very frustrating. But that's what he is as a player. It doesn't make him a bad player. It makes him, like basically every single player in the history of basketball, a player who has flaws, despite being a plus player, right? It is like you want it's instead of hammering, like Josh Hart is a better player than Deuce McBride, in my opinion. I don't think that's a very controversial statement, but I think he's a better player than Deuce McBride. But putting all of your best things together doesn't automatically mean it's going to be your best lineup. And spreading that out and making sure that you have 2 or 3 of these guys at all times on the floor so that you can avoid, okay, well, and again, I understand I'm only talking about when the team's at full strength. I'm not talking about right now. That's its own separate thing. But like when the team is at full strength, when you do shit like that, it helps you avoid things like, oh, I have to play Precious at the 4 because all of my starters played fucking the entire first quarter, so I need to play him now. And it avoids you putting out lineups that lack the requisite talent at times to compete and to hold water. And it helps you probably avoid it will help you avoid extending guys minutes that maybe they don't need or shouldn't have, right? Like Mikal Bridges, OG Anunoby, Josh Hart, those 3 specifically have played a lot of fucking minutes this season. And I think that if you redistributed how those minutes were allocated throughout the rotation, you could probably end up, I'm just going to say it, you will end up better on the aggregate, and you will have to play, you won't need to play those guys as much because you will be winning games and winning stretches of games earlier, right? You will be winning games earlier because of how you now are spreading out your top end talent, roster talent. And could I be wrong? Sure. Wouldn't be the fucking first time I'd be wrong. But you know what I would like? I would like to know that I'm wrong. And that's the point that I think we're both talking to is just fucking try. Like, fucking try something and let's just see if it works. If it works, great. If it doesn't, okay, then you can go back to the original fucking thing that you were doing anyway. What did you really lose here? Like, because to me, The team
Well, you
has
might have
20
lost the game because of it, right?
right, and
That's the
look,
argument.
right, but the other argument I would just make is like, yeah, but you've lost games doing the fucking shit you're doing. So, are you really losing anything in the aggregate? And
Yeah, if you're going to lose no matter what, at least you learn something, right?
right,
So
it's really been a tiresome season for me in terms of like it's it's boring having the same arguments constantly. I'm like, I don't know how many more times I can say like, yeah, I don't. The starting lineup isn't very good. We need to figure that out. And oh, I hate playing Precious at the 4. I wish we didn't do that. And it's like, what I mean, we've had the same fucking 5, 10 arguments, whatever arguments, constantly throughout the season. And at some point, it's like, all right, well, this is just kind of boring now. I don't know what I think. Everybody has said what they could possibly say, either pro or con or whatever, and there's really nothing to argue. It's like, this is just what it is. And okay, I mean, if this is what it is, I'll tell you what, the Knicks are not headed to anything. They are going to be probably in a dogfight in a first round series that they shouldn't be in a dogfight in. And then they're going to get absolutely fucking crushed. They're going to get absolutely crushed in the second round by either Boston or Cleveland. Like, I think for the Knicks to even extend either of those series to like 6 games would be, I mean, if you offered me that right now, hey, you get to take the series to 6 games and you won't totally embarrass yourselves, I probably would take that. Because I think that's their best case scenario. I think that is the absolute ceiling for this team. But in all honesty, especially against Boston, I think it'll be embarrassing. I think it'll be completely embarrassing.
And it has been every time they've played this season, right? So
right, like it's going to be embarrassing if if we just go into a series like that and we're like, we do what we do, and that's that. Like, okay, do what you do, because you know what? I know what Joe Mazzulla is going to do. He's going to do what he does, and what he does is, I'm willing to play big. I'm willing to play small. I'm willing to go 5 out. I'm willing to play these guys. I'm willing to play that guy. Like, they fucking absolutely destroyed Phoenix last night. I know Phoenix isn't great. They won 4 in a row, but we know they have their own issues. They destroyed Phoenix last night, crushed them, and Jason Tatum didn't even play the game. And it's like, do I think that Peyton Pritchard and Luke Cornett, like, I'm not saying these are good players, but do I think that they're as good on other teams? Like, I think that he's getting a lot out of these players.
I mean, he gets it out of basically Hauser, right? He gets a lot out of these guys. Even, I mean, Derek White has improved a lot, right? Do you think he's having that kind of success somewhere else, like where he's getting all-star talk? Maybe it's illegitimate, but like, he's a really important player for them. And I think trying different things. I mean, like, if Tibbs had that roster, are they as good the last couple of years?
I'll ask you another way to ask this question, I think, is, if Tibbs has that roster, are they good in the way, like, are they great in the way that makes them great? Like, are they great because they have an ethos and they play to that ethos and they do it consistently of like drive and kick, drive and kick, drive and kick, drive and kick, drive and kick. Like, we're trying to get the best quality threes we can get, and we're trying to get them at the highest volume we can possibly get. Like, we switch everything. Like that's that. Forget the offense, right? The offense, they're probably going to be great no matter what they do on offense. We can argue about, would they be as great? Would it be as diverse or whatever? Fine. On defense, do you think they're going to do half the shit they do the moment Tibbs is going to be like, nope, we got to have one. We have to have Porzingis or Horford on the floor at all times.
Or both.
We're going to play, yeah, or both. And we're going to play drop. Like, we're going to play drop, and that's what we do. And everybody is like, everybody has, like, I don't think, like, I think defensively they would not be as good. And, look, I think before Joe Mazzulla got there, they were already a great defensive team under Ime Udoka, so he deserves credit for that also. But, like, they were already, right, switching across the board and doing a lot of these things. And I just can't imagine a world where Tibbs would do that. And maybe you can, look, if you want to throw at me, like, well, he hasn't really ever had those rosters. Maybe that's true. But I just have never even seen him intentionally or be intentional about it in terms of like, well, maybe I can't do it for 48 minutes because the totality of my roster doesn't allow me to do that. But I'm going to do it for 5 minutes here. I'm going to do it for 3 minutes there. I'm going to do it for 2 minutes here. Like, I've never even seen that. So, yeah, like, I don't know. I just think that when I watch a lot of teams around the league, I just think there are a lot of coaches that maybe if you don't like, I think there are a lot of people that have soured on the Knicks' overall talent this season, which is understandable for a variety of reasons. Um, but I think there are a ton of coaches that I watch around the league, and I'm like, I think this guy would get more out of this roster. I think that guy would get more out of this roster. I think this guy would try this. I think that guy would try these things and try various like. There's nothing being attempted. It is like he got this roster and was like, well, this is what we do, so we're just going to keep doing it, and that's that. And that's the inherent frustration for me watching this year's team, and it's effectively why I'm like, I don't know, I just don't find that there's much to talk about in between games. Like, what am I going to talk about? I'm going to talk about how Cat sucks and drop. I'm going to talk about, well, I wish Mikal Bridges would get to the rim more. I wish he was more involved offensively. I wish, they had more going on off the ball, eye candy, misdirection stuff. I've already talked about.
I
Talking about
think
it for 70 fucking games. There's nothing else to talk about.
what I think, like you mentioned this, right? That like, well, Hart might be a better player than Deuce. It depends on the situation. And I think the idea that there's just one best lineup, we saw this with Quickly, right? Like his on-off was crazy and he helped basically every lineup. But part of that was being deployed strategically, right? It's understanding when those strategic opportunities, like you said, even if it's for 3 or 4 possessions a game, right? Imagine in the middle of that Miami Heat series, if he just threw Obi out there, right? And they get a couple of fast breaks, right? And Spoelstra panics and calls timeout. You can bet your ass he would have targeted Obi on the next possession. But then that, right? And then you go back to something else, right? Maybe you zone up. Or you can play that cat and mouse game a little bit. I just haven't seen that. And so I think that there's this attachment to like, and again, I think when you're building an identity, that's really important. We're going to play the way we play because we believe in that, right? But that makes total sense when you have Julius Randle, spare parts, and a few young guys, right? Giving that structure, giving that confidence, right? Because if you're playing all different things, they don't have that confidence that, oh, we can't just impose our will. We have to react to what the opponent's doing. You're not in that situation anymore. You're in the situation where you have, I think, look, what the roster lacks in depth, it definitely has versatility. I think, we've seen Dadier struggle. We also have seen that he's reasonably big guy. And, he's starting to play well in G League, right? It took Hukporti a long time to get on the court. Maybe that was needed. But, you haven't tried him with Cat, right? You complain about 5 out. I would say that trying Cat with other bigs in a more in those strategic ways, playing him with Mitch, playing with Hukporti, like a true big, those are helpful, right? And then so going back to the Deuce Hart thing, Hart may be better than Deuce, but in certain matchups, Deuce may be better, right? For example, right, if you're playing Miami and they're if you're playing or Oklahoma City or this team with like super big guards, yeah, Hart might make more sense as the point of attack defender. Against a team like Boston or even Cleveland, right? Let's say they're playing Cleveland. The way Josh Hart has played defense, if your Cleveland is throwing out Garland and Mitchell, do you really think Hart's going to be better on defense? And people talk about the rebounding, but we got killed by them at the point of attack and just making rotations. So you talk about size and losing that on defense. There isn't a very good argument that Hart has been better on average than Deuce on defense, but that's kind of the point, right? In certain matchups, he might be. In certain matchups, the fact that you've never tried that, it's not just saying you don't try it or we haven't seen how it'll work, because that's not a binary thing. It's going to work sometimes. It's a good thing to have in your pocket. And it's a good thing to have familiarity with like what the strengths are, it offers you the opportunity to self-scout. That's another thing, right? Because you say, well, we put it on film, teams will react. And then you have like, that's called self-scouting, right? You can throw in more wrinkles. So that's part of like the complexity that happens, right? You have this identity, teams react to it. You try something new, put it on tape, teams are going to react to that, and then it builds from there. But if you don't try, if you just keep things very limited, there's like a compounding effect that you completely lose. So it's we'll see what happens. I do want to to your point, we've been pretty repetitive about some of these things all season. I do want to get your thoughts a little bit on Tyler Kolek. I was not a huge fan of the pick when they made it. I wanted them to see if Deuce could really be a backup point guard, because for the reason that if you can run your offense, that gives you a pit bull point of attack defender, right? And I would rather have that than have to move him off ball, but then now create a liability on defense, right? And then Kolek wasn't playing this season. I wasn't one of those guys who was up in arms about it. But the last 3 games now, he has looked quite good. Prez, he played. It was a weird usage that, again, was reminiscent of quickly, where he played the entire third quarter and then barely played in the fourth. But Prez was saying a lot of the defensive breakdowns weren't really on Kolek. I thought the previous 2 games against Washington and who else did we play? Washington and who in the middle?
Charlotte, Spurs.
Yeah. Washington and Charlotte. He, those aren't great teams at all. These are tanking teams. But the point is, he looked pretty competent. Does a good job of taking care of the ball. I think the big difference between him and Payne is not Payne is wired to shoot, but it's kind of because there isn't much else he can do. Once he gets in the lane, teams will live with that floater. And teams don't trust him to be able to keep his dribble alive, be creative, Nash, or whatever. Kolek has a lot more versatility to his game and leverages that to make defend every part of the floor, because every part of the floor is a threat. And that's a valuable skill at times. There's probably other times where he's going to be just played off the floor, because there are going to be teams that exploit him on defense, particularly in the playoffs. But I've been cautiously optimistic. I'm not saying he should take Campaign's spot. But in terms of evaluating the Knicks draft, it looks like Huckporty is a real contributor, or should be that. You can probably, I think you mentioned, you can get him on the Jericho Sims contract after the season. Dadier is still very much raw, but we saw, even in G League, he had 25 points on 7 of 11. McCullough has size. He looks like he's healthy and has been a contributor in the G League. And Kolek now, I think, is showing up. So this draft, I think, cautiously, I'm a little bit more optimistic than maybe I was before. But curious to your thoughts on Kolek and how you feel about going forward, and even now him.
Yeah, I think Kolek is fine. I think he is a good player. I think there's useful or a good regular season player in the rotation anyway. I think there are matchups that are going to be tough for him. And ideally, last night, would you want him to be playing 12 minutes in a row against the Clippers starters? No, I wouldn't. But I also, that's what needed to happen yesterday, right? That was just the situation that occurred, because Brunson's out, Deuce is out, Campaign gets hurt, so he doesn't come out for the second half. We'll have to see what his status is. The Knicks are getting really thin in the backcourt, which is kind of ironic, given previously it's like, wow, they have too many guys back there. But yeah, I think there's a lot of good things he does. I think that he gives you a skill set you don't have really from anybody like that. And obviously, I'm not suggesting he's a superior offensive player or point guard to Jalen Brunson, but he runs point guard in a different way. I think the way he runs it kind of ensures that guys are constantly staying involved offensively. They're touching the rock. It's moving around. And it's getting things organized, running sets, calling things out, right, as you're bringing the ball up the floor. Whereas I think Brunson is more of let me get into my bag, and then guys can kind of figure out off of me. Now, do I think that's entirely a Jalen Brunson thing? No, I don't. But we don't need to revert back to the previous conversation here. But yeah, I think there's a value to all of those things. Now, obviously, the defense, is it going to be problematic at times? Of course. That's why I don't think he's ever going to be some high minute starter. But you don't need to play great defenders all 48 minutes of every game in the regular season. That's the value of the regular season. First of all, you're not playing great teams every night. You're going to be playing plenty of fucking bottom feeder teams that are trying to lose games, teams that are tanking, teams that have no desire to win at points in the season. And it's up to you as a coach to kind of figure out, okay, where do I use him? Where do I get away with this? And then in what instances do I have to cut back on that guy? What moments do I have to reduce his minutes, cut his rotation down? And that's kind of where he's at right now. Look, and the other thing, obviously, he needs to be able to do. He has to look to score more. He has to look like, I think he is playing very much within himself to a degree offensively right now. He's not looking at the hoop a lot of times, and it's almost like a credit to him that even despite that, he's able to get the assists he's able to. But you need to be more the only time I think he actually tried to score yesterday, right? It was a bailout possession at the end of the shot clock, and he had the ball, and he's like, all right, I guess there's nothing going on, so he just had to drive on Harden. Harden blocked him. I mean, he did get fouled on it, but whatever, it doesn't matter. He drove on him and whatever. He got to the basket. Harden blocks him from behind. Should have been a foul, but you have to pick and choose your moments better, and you have to it can't that can't be the only situation where you're like, all right, I guess I have to shoot. I think one of his threes was like that too, right? It was in the corner late in the shot clock on a step back, and it's you have to be more willing to take shots, and also I think he has it's a little bit tricky for him because I think his shot, if I'm not mistaken, and correct me if I'm wrong because I did not watch him in college. He's like an elbow jumper type of guy, right? Wasn't that one of his shots in college? I believe.
He had a good idea of who he was at the elbow.
Yeah. I think that's not a shot, obviously, you want to shoot at high volume, especially in the NBA. But if that's the shot that is your comfort shot, I don't think it would be bad. And I mean, now look, Payne's probably not going to play on Friday, so go crazy, man.
Is he in a lot of pain?
Okay.
Right. I actually don't know what did they have a diagnosis or
they haven't said a diagnosis, but I think Begley reported that he's likely to be out for Friday. But take one of those shots early in the shot clock, right? Call your own number here, because at some point soon, teams are just going to be like, oh, we don't have to play him to score at all. We can just play him to pass because that's what he's going to do. He's not going to look to score. But if it takes him taking a couple of those shots to not just get in a rhythm, but play with more confidence, find his confidence, because I don't think he's shooting confidently at all. Both of his free throws yesterday looked rushed. You know what I mean? I don't know. He looked weird at the line. It's he's got to find that confidence in his shot, because I do see him kind of have, I mean, clearly confidence in some of his decision making, and that's fine. I mean, good. But defensively, I actually have been somewhat impressed by him in the sense of look, he's going to be a problematic defender in the sense that he's small. He doesn't have great hand. He's not the strongest dude in the world. So you're going to have moments where teams are hunting him and they're going to have some success. But I think it was Chris Herring yesterday who said he tweeted out, or as they call it on Blue Sky, skeeted out. He said something along the lines of Kolek, rough third quarter for Kolek, got picked a lot on defense or something along those lines. And I actually look, they were definitely picking on him on defense. I didn't think he was bad on defense at all. I actually think look, some of the issue was just Harden and Kawhi made a lot of tough shots. And then some of it was were they hunting him? Sure. But I think he did a good job of allowing, be it McCall, be it OG, to get back in front and then recovering back to Dunn, who was his cover. I thought he did a good job of that. I didn't think he was culpable for most of the points that they scored in that third quarter. And the Knicks, quite frankly, they were in the game. They were bucket for bucket with the Clippers. That over the course of the first 34 minutes of the game, 33, 32, something like that, it was basically a tie game. They were there. And then, again, this is where I'm not going to blame Tibbs. He went pulled Cat and McCall a little bit early in the third quarter, probably because he wanted to get them out to start the fourth. And he went with Mitch and Shamit, and that lineup was not good. They got destroyed. They couldn't get into offense well. They couldn't create shots well, which I think, if you want to talk about Kolek's limitations, like, yeah, he's not going to be a dynamic shot maker now. So yeah, I think that is where I'm at with Tyler Kolek, where like I think defensively he's able to execute to scheme well. I think he does his duties and he does them consistently and he does them as hard as he possibly can based on what we've seen so far. But are there moments where that's just not going to matter because he's a small guy and he's not the most athletic and he can get picked on? Sure. But what we're ultimately describing here is a capable bench point guard who can probably play 15-ish minutes a night. And guess what? If that's what you have behind Jalen Brunson, that's fine. That's good. Like, you can live with that. And that's a guy you can probably have as part of your at least regular season rotation and be successful with it.
Yeah, I mean, he's a fun player to watch. I've enjoyed Kolek. I think he's held up reasonably well on defense. He has decent size. It's probably not enough to save him, but he has good instincts. Generally makes the right play. I forget if it was you or Prez talking about this on the Discord, but literally just making boring rotations. I think it was you said this, right? Is like a step up from what a lot of the Knicks guards have been doing. I mean, I don't even think Payne has been that much of a disaster on defense, but we know what his limitations are. And it will be interesting, especially if Kolek. So Payne and Cat, I think Tyrese mentioned this. Payne and Cat have had a pretty high net rating together. So for all the times it seems like Payne is chucking and the offense is stagnant with the bench, it has on net been good. But I do think long term, if Cat is going to be running bench units, I do think, and again, this is not some commentary saying that Payne needs to be benched for Kolek yet, but thinking about the long-term evolution of this team, you're usually going to want Cat to run these bench units. The problem is he's not, when he creates from the perimeter, we've seen it, right? He puts his head down and goes to the rim. I'm not saying he should never drive, but, once that drive is taken away, then he has to either space or they don't post him up that much. But there's a lot of possessions where because of that, he doesn't even get the ball, right? And that's fine when he's spacing, pulling the big out, and you have Brunson and Bridges playing off of that. But when it's the bench, you really need him to score. And a guy like Kolek and his creativity could maybe do more with Cat, right? You can run a little bit more interesting pick and rolls, right? You can do DHOs. I think Kolek is a reasonably good shooter, so he can play off ball too, and he's a smart mover. There are some wrinkles you can experiment with, if you're willing to experiment. Going forward with Kolek, is he a guy who can play with Brunson? Again, this is the kind of thing where it's like probably not in the NBA Finals, but it would be fun, right? He is probably the best passer on the roster. Brunson used to play with a pretty good passer named Luka Doncic, and we saw like that there's another part of his game that can be unlocked there. Let me ask.
Luka was so fucking bad at the end of the game yesterday. He's so lucky LeBron bailed him out.
I had a friend who was really stressing out. I'm glad. The Pacers, by the way, the 3 seed is. There's 10 games left. The Pacers are still 3 games back, but
they're basically 4 games back.
Oh, because we have the
series. Tiebreaker.
So it still looks pretty like the Knicks should be a 3 seed, but it would have been 2 games, or the Knicks were. I'm definitely happy that the Lakers won, but I do want to throw this back to you. I think we were talking about this on the Discord. One of the issues with the Knicks is kind of just getting, and this is more of a roster issue, I think, is 3-point volume, right? They have quality shooters, but they don't have so there's 2 issues I think that were brought up, and I'm curious because I think I lean a little bit differently than you do on this. So one issue is they lost Dante DiVincenzo. They replaced him with Bridges, who's a very capable 3-point shooter, hasn't been great above the break. and more importantly, doesn't have like that bucket mentality, right? Or ability maybe to like just way deep with a hard contest, right in your face, just pull up and knock it down. They don't have too many. Deuce has a quick trigger. Bridges can shoot and has the height. OG has been more aggressive, and I think DJ from Knicks Film School posted this, but he's actually been a lot better above the break this year than he has been. So they have some guys, but they don't have that Dante level guy. I think that's, or a Beasley, or just a crazy gunner. That I think is what you brought up from a roster perspective for me. And this ties, I think, is like I'm segueing into this because I was thinking about this with Kolek. To me, it is generating those threes that is more difficult, right? Because when you have your two best 3-point shooters, first of all, are also the two guys who run the most offense, who create the most offense. So Brunson, it's tough to ask Brunson can only take so many pull-ups, especially when teams are not going under. And if he's not getting catch and shoot, that's going to limit his volume. Cat is its own thing. He needs to shoot more. But still, he's also asked to run a lot of offense. And on the bench,
did get 7 up. Yeah, he did get 7 up yesterday, which is a good number for him.
Yeah, make 7 up yours. So that's the kids are not going to get that one.
Nope.
So he needs to pull more. But when you're depending on those guys to both be your shooters and creators, it limits what you can do. And so the answers that we've said, have Bridges initiate more. But on the bench, that's a limitation with Payne too, right? He can get those threes up, but creating for others on the 3-point line, unless it's in transition and he's pushing the ball, which I actually think he does a pretty good job of. He's not a gravity guy. They have beyond Brunson and Cat, but Cat, it's its own thing a little bit. They don't have a lot of gravity guys who can generate those threes. To me, that's the bigger issue. And I do think Kolek, at times can help with that relative to a guy like Payne. But I didn't want to talk about that because I think we disagree a little bit on which of those two is the bigger issue from like a roster perspective.
I think that the biggest issue, I think they need a big wing. That's what I think. I think they need a big wing. They need somebody who is a good defender. And I will say that specifically because, and I talked about this in the post game yesterday, I think they need a big wing, kind of similar in stature, size, however you want to put it, to OG, who is also a good defender, because and probably also a good rebounder and can shoot the 3. Again, these are not like this is not like something you just easily find out there. So I'm not saying it's going to be easy to find. Maybe it's Pacome Dadier. Maybe his trajectory and development, from between now and to next season is going to get us there. But I do think he looks better physically too. I just wanted to throw that out there. I think he looks like he's growing into his body. NBA weight training and nutrition probably helping out there. But
it's also just natural growth. He's 18, right?
So yeah, right.
That's where
so
you have the highest curve.
Right. But I think they need that because when you're watching like the Clippers last night, right? They have these lineups they can go to where it's like, yeah, we don't have a center on the floor, and it's fine. We have 3 or 4, 5, even 6'5", 6. Some guys between like 6'5" and 6'10" or 6'9" or whatever, and we're gonna keep switching. And there's not, and you know what? Even though we don't have a true big on the floor, all of these guys are good rebounders. So as a group, we're a good rebounding team, even though we are giving up size and we don't have a true big on the floor or whatever. And like, I want the Knicks to have that ability. And I think they can have that ability if they have one more big wing. And they obviously have to go get that thing. And it's significant. And maybe it's Pacome Dadier. Maybe you have to be creative in trade or free
McCullough
agency.
too, maybe, right? Who's been doing well.
Yeah. McCullough could be another guy. And McCullough's been playing well down there too in the G League, so good to see that. But yeah, that's what I think the biggest need is. Now, would I like another ball handler creator? Sure.
I'm talking specifically for the 3-point volume, right? Because I think your issue is that we don't have a Dante, and I think mine is that we don't have somebody who can free up Brunson, Cat specifically, but another gravity guy.
Yeah, I think
in terms of the 3-point volume, getting that up.
well, I think Dante again, if you just plug in Dante here, he would have gravity. He would make it easier for Brunson.
I'm talking about creating for like others though, right? Like paint gravity, where that's why I was saying with Kolek, you have a little bit of that where you can generate threes for others. So is the issue that we have not enough guys who can create threes for others, or we don't have enough shooters? I think that's, to me, I think we do have shooters.
I think that this is, again, mostly a coaching issue. Now, you always would like more guys that can create, but it's very hard for me to think that, like, you have Cat. Your 3-point volume should not be where it's at. These are consequences of choices you're making in terms of the lineups you're throwing out there and how you're using the personnel you have. Like, yeah, man, you know what? Your 3-point volume might not be great if you're dedicating like 8 minutes a night to Precious Achua at the fucking 4. Like, it's not going to be great, especially if those minutes are going to be playing. Half of it is next to Mitchell fucking Robinson. Like, there's nothing else to say. Like, this is just, you're making choices across the board that suppress your ability to generate high 3-point volume. Like, again, this is like the Josh Hart thing. You start him, you're immediately conceding the ability for teams to play off of him from the jump, and you have to live with that. Like, I don't think the Knicks need to be I don't think they need to be a high volume of 3-point shooting team. That in and of itself, like, chasing that shouldn't be the goal, right? It should not be the goal that, well, we want to simply be the best 3-point volume team that we can be at all costs. It should be, we want to generate quality threes. We want to maximize and we want to push the ceiling as far as we can, as far that is optimal for us to shoot threes. I don't think that necessarily needs to mean that you're top 10 in 3-point attempts per game, or, control 3-point attempt rate, but it should be, I think, league average at minimum is a fair standard to have given the personnel we have. Like, the fact that the Knicks are languishing where they are at this point is absurd. I'm like, it really is. I don't think I'm being harsh when I say that. It is rather absurd. And while without Jalen Brunson, you can maybe argue like it's a little bit more understandable. I actually think 1 or 3-point volume isn't better without Brunson. I'd have to check that. But like, I think it's just bizarre to me that you can have Brunson and Cat, and there's this idea of like, well, how can you create threes? Like, Brunson's the only guy that can create, and Cat is, like, he's not that good of a creator. It's like, Cat's playing at the fucking 5, dude. Like, you should not have problems generating threes between him and Jalen Brunson, surrounded by OG Anunoby and Mikal Bridges. And if you are having a problem, that's on you as the coach to figure out. Is it personnel related? Is it what you're doing scheme wise? I don't know. Like, now, if your point is you would like to be a elite 3-point volume team, then yeah, they do need to target that in free agency, and I think they should target that in free agency. I think they should want to get more volume shooters, and specifically guys that are willing to shoot threes above the break, which they are far too hesitant to take, aside from Cat and Jalen Brunson. They need more guys that are willing to take those shots, and Campaign probably a little bit too happy to take those shots. But yeah, I think they should target that. I think they need to target that. But the current team, like, I think they absolutely should be able to hunt and generate more threes than they have been. And the fact that they aren't, again, just speaks to me as more of a coaching or personnel, or more of a coaching issue rather than a personnel issue.
Yeah, and I mean, I think, what I was going to say is, yeah, like, I mean, it's Kolek's passing is pretty jarring because I think Brunson actually is pretty underrated as a passer, but you don't have the crazy wraparounds or cross court dimes. Like, he is still going to try to find his in the mid range, right? He's not going to pass up a decent look for mid range to try to throw a crazy pass to the corner, right? Which helps them win the possession battle and all those things. So that's also like just a team philosophy thing. Maybe that needs to evolve. Cat, we know, is actually a pretty good passer for a big, but isn't that guy who's like Randall, just generating drive and kicks, right? On drives, he's going to the rim. So you don't have like a lot of those passers. But I think you were mentioning this before. Who is a great passer on Boston? Tatum is a really good passer. He might be a better passer than
he's become a great passer.
Yeah. So that's part of it. But think about who creates for them, right? There's Tatum, there's Brown, there's White, there's Drew, there's Porzingis. None of these guys really, besides Tatum, have ever been known as very good passers. Brown, in many ways, I don't think is very good. He's had kind of the opposite reputation at times. White is a solid. I mean, White and Holiday are make the right play guys, but I think that's kind of the point. I think you made this point. It's like they are able to generate a ton of threes, and it's not even like Derek White wasn't known as this elite 3-point shooter before coming to Boston. Drew Holiday wasn't known as an elite 3-point shooter. But they always, so they have shooters, and they probably have more shooters than the Knicks, but they don't have great passers or guys who are known as these great high gravity passers that generate tons of assists for other players. But they're able to, they're all making the right read. They're making quick reads. They're moving the ball. They get an advantage and they never waste it. Now you can say it took them years to build that chemistry. It took time, and the Knicks have been, to Boston's advantage, right? This has been a multi-year process, and they've had a little bit maybe more continuity than Tibbs has had. Right, his first year, he basically becomes this Randall-centric thing, institutes rim protection, rebounding as the core principles, right? Then they pivot to Brunson, right? So now you have the Brunson-centric roster, still going with the rim protectors. You have Hartenstein and Mitch. We're going to keep that mentality, right? That Brunson is a playoff phenom, and we will also bully you on the glass, and that's how we're going to win, right? But then then the front office goes another way and says we're going to get Dante, right? So now you're leaning a little bit more into offense, but your defense on the backcourt can be had a little bit, right? So Tibbs has to adapt to that. And then this year, they've leaned completely. You were asking him, it's not just Tibbs's preference, right? They kind of started this whole thing by leaning into defense and rebounding as kind of the ethos of the team. Now you're leaning very much away from that because, to maximize your title window, making that shift in identity is, I think, a little bit more difficult than what a team like Boston has done, right? Because as you mentioned, this isn't about them having a bunch of elite passers. They just all know the right reads. They've built that culture and system. To have that happen, especially with so many new faces over a year, that identity shift, I mean, maybe that's a little bit too much to ask. Not the identity shift to becoming Boston, but going from a team that for the Tibbs era has essentially been slow it down, win the possession battle, and play defense, to kind of a roster where you're trying to maximize offense and just be good enough on defense.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things we should be striving to do that we're not doing.
But I'm saying shifting that identity in a year, especially with so many new faces, is a lot to ask, right?
But are you doing anything to shift the identity? What's happening to shift the? It's different if you're making attempts. And honestly, I think that's bullshit. I don't think it's that fucking hard. The fucking Cavs are doing it. They just did it. They changed their head coach. They didn't make any personnel moves, really. They added Ty Jerome, and he's having a fucking career season, obviously. They traded for DeAndre Hunter, whatever. But they did that, and they're great. They're one of the great offenses of all time. They are one of the great shooting teams of all time, and they're taking a high volume of threes despite starting 2 non-shooters. This stuff is intentional. You have to be intentional about it from day one. And what we have known is from day one, the Knicks started off like a great offensive team. They were, and I still buy that they're a very good offensive team when they're at full strength. But I think a lot of that is being buoyed by the talent rather than the system making the game easier for guys. And I have a hard time just saying well, it's hard. Yeah, it is hard. That's why you get paid fucking money. You get paid $10 million a year to do your fucking job. So do your fucking job.
That's what the money's for.
But it is that's why I fucking hearing oh, well, difficult. Yeah, it is fucking difficult. You get paid $10 million. You know what? in this fucking world that we live in this country at this point in time, I don't want to hear about how fucking hard your job is if you're making $10 million a year, and that money's guaranteed, by the way. Okay, it's guaranteed. He's signed a 3-year extension. He can get fired today. He's getting that money. That's coming to him no matter what. So I don't want to hear about it's fucking hard. Yeah, it is fucking hard. That's why you get paid $10 million a year. Get off your fucking fat ass and do it. Like, because he hasn't been coaching this year. He has not been coaching this year. I'm sorry. Like, this is not, he's not, again, like, if you're saying it's hard, I can accept that it's hard. But what are you doing towards that end? What are you working towards to that end? What have you seen in the last, let's say, in the last 3 months? What have you seen to, okay, teams are just here's a very specific one. Teams are defending Josh Hart, the center, who they effectively use to double Cat when you're posting him. What are you doing? What have the Knicks done to counter that? What have been their counters to that? Have you seen anything that you watch and you're like, this is nice, I like this, and they're doing it consistently, and wow, now that they're doing this, teams are struggling to defend them again, and this is not just like they're able to generate quality offense. What have you seen to that end? Because I haven't seen anything. I have not seen anything that's consistent. I think there are nights where they just cut really, really well and they're able to get by, or there are nights where Josh Hart randomly goes off from 3, which have lately been few and far between. Or there are nights where the talent advantage just means it doesn't matter. Or there are nights where Jalen Brunson goes off and Cat goes off and it becomes irrelevant. But I haven't seen anything systemic that you're like, oh yeah, that's nice. That's a good adjustment. And now that they're doing this thing, teams are now going to have to counter that. I haven't seen that at all. And like the thing they do that I've noticed the most is if they have Cat post and his man goes double, then Josh Hart immediately cuts down the paint down the middle of the floor. But like, I mean, yeah, that's nice. That's not really a counter. I mean, it's not, and that's mostly just like it means that you're hoping for Josh Hart to like catch them off guard and Cat to execute the pass and get a layup out of it. But like, I don't know. I don't see him being used as an off-ball screener. I don't like. You can use stuff like that. I think Bailey Liao tweeted this out today, but you could use, right. Let's say you have Cat in the post. You can have Josh Hart in the corner on the opposite corner, and you could have Mikal Bridges or OG Anunoby or Jalen Brunson when he's healthy or Deuce McBride or Cam Payne be at the wing, and you can go have Josh Hart go set a fucking a screen for them and have him flare to the corner, and that maybe Cat can hit that pass. Like that's a set. The Spurs used to do that all the time with their guys. That set for the corner shooter from the and you have to throw a cross court pass on the post. But I don't see the Knicks doing that. Often, what I see happening most of the time is Josh Hart is at the wing on the opposite wing. OG or Mikal will be in the corner, and either the corner man just stays where he is, which is not. I mean, that's fine. That's okay. But often I also see Josh Hart cuts and OG Anunoby cuts down the baseline, and now your spacing is all fucked up. And you see this stuff all the time. Like their principles offensively they're so bad this year. They're so bad. They're not disciplined in terms of maintaining their spacing. They're not continuous in their actions. I mean, you see things all the time offensively, even on nights where they're good, where you're like, man, that worked, but I don't really like that. I mean, they had one yesterday, fucking bizarre possession, and I think they ended up scoring out of it anyway, so it didn't matter. This was in the first half where, like, I think Josh Hart and Cat were both supposed to set a double drag or something, but then they just like, I mean, calling what they did screening would be an insult to screening. But they just kind of like stood right next to each other. And then, like, I don't know. I think I don't remember if it was Payne or Kolek, but whoever it was like kind of waiting for them to like move. And then they kind of did, but didn't. And they didn't spread out. So then he went around this heavy air quotes here, the screens. And there was, I mean, nothing happened. There's terrible spacing. And it was just like watching stuff like that. I mean, I don't know. I've been saying it now for a while, but like you watch this team, and I think you get the sense of like, I don't think they practice. I don't think they've been practicing all fucking year. And if that's your way to get around the minutes you're playing them, okay, I understand that. But that ultimately is your choice as a coach too. And I have to judge you on that. If you're choosing like, hey, we're not going to practice, okay, that's your choice. And
I mean,
if the
isn't
medical
Tibbs
department saying
known
that,
for like crazy practices though? That's been his rep.
yeah, I don't think that. I think that rep is long gone, and they've all talked about that previously. But
Even Quickly
like,
was saying, right? Like Quickly was saying the practices are different. Like, I mean, when you say long gone, you mean this year, or like it seems like
I
even up
think
until last
I
year, I
don't.
think
I don't think the starters don't practice. They have not practiced. They didn't practice last year. They did not. They're not practicing this year. That's very obvious. Bench guys, sure. Depth guys, absolutely. But starters, no, no shot. They're practicing. Absolutely no shot. If they are practicing, I want to see what the fuck they're practicing because it doesn't look like it to me. What you're practicing how to fucking screw up your matchups in transition? Is that a thing? Because if they're doing that, they're doing a great fucking job. They're doing a fantastic job of never matching up, not knowing who to match up on, not knowing how they want to cover things, not knowing their rotations, not knowing, you know, what coverage they're in various situations. If that is what they're practicing, I got to tell you, they're doing a fucking phenomenal job. So thumbs up to them if that's what the
yeah,
practices
but these
are.
are franchise players, and we're sitting here talking about practice. Like, actually, I will still Brunson, the franchise player, does screw up the least. That is, it's interesting because I think one of the great things Tibbs does, especially with young players and depth guys, right, is he gets them to focus on details on defense, right? Like we saw this happen with Quickly, where you could say, he's a a very smart player, but his attention to detail on defense, always making the right rotation, understanding where to be, that was elite. He got a lot out of Mitchell Robinson, by the way. Before he came here, Mitchell Robinson, those kind of things, boxing out, kind of paying attention to details on defense, being a quarterback on defense, were things there were major gaps for Mitch, and he's developed them, right? And on that team, right? Like, but you can see, I think that impact seems to have been less the higher the profile of the guy, right? You look at the development in terms of attention to detail for guys like IQ, guys like Deuce, even Grimes, right? I think Grimes did, Grimes is always good at point of attack. I think he improved his off-ball ability as well, too. And I think that really showed up in that we talk about him defending Butler, but I think he was also an impact in the Miami series by his off-ball stuff. So these younger guys, Tibbs builds that hunger in them, and I think he is great at teaching all those details. And I'm going to leave Brunson out because he just is his own thing. If the other guys aren't practicing, I believe he has to be. I actually have been really impressed with his defense this year as well. But Randall is a guy you never saw that attention to detail get coached up the way it did in some other players, right? And I'm not going to say it's some inherent lack of instincts. There's been times in his career where Mitchell Robinson's looked like he lacked instincts, right? And he can be goofy or whatever. Tibbs got that out of him. But the higher the profile guy, we talk about the guys who didn't improve at those things. And now, kind of the buddy relationship with Hart, with Cat, he's, Cat, maybe it's a thing where they obviously had they clashed in Minnesota. He's trying to coach him differently. But I do think, I don't know if I'd go so far as to say they're not practicing, but I will say Tibbs seems to be great at coaching up and getting guys who are, lower profile, hungry to buy into the details, and maybe struggles a little bit more with that with some of the higher profile players.
Yeah, I mean, that's probably look. These are guys that have been around the league. They've seen how other coaches do things. OG Anunoby was on a championship team, right? Like I know he wasn't healthy for the playoffs, but he was on a championship roster. Josh Hart's been around the league. Mikal Bridges has been in the NBA Finals. Mikal Bridges has been further, as a player, or I guess Tibbs he did win a championship as an assistant coach, so I don't want to go that far. But Mikal Bridges has been in NBA Finals, right? So he's been far in his career. Campaign's been in NBA Finals. Shaman, I think, has been not in the NBA Finals, but he's been deep in the
Wasn't he on that
playoffs.
Phoenix time? Shammer
No, he
was on the
wasn't.
Phoenix team too. No, that was just
I
campaign.
don't think he was. Yeah, I don't think he was on that team. Cat has been to a Western Conference Finals. Like these guys have been on other teams. They've had other coaches. They've had other good coaches in a lot of instances, and like they can come in, and if they're like, they can come in and be like, why are we playing drop? Why is that like our thing all the time? It's fine if it's your base, but why is that the thing all the time? Whereas a guy like, if you have, and they're also different types of players. Like, like Dante had bounced around the league, but Dante was also like, he had bounced around the league, and he, like Josh Hart, I think is basically ride or die with Tibbs, right? And that's because he found a home here, right? It's like, oh, I'm good here. I'll just do whatever. I'm a good soldier. And I'm going to max out. And, look, we know that he's had his space cadet issues too, but like, I don't think it's really an effort thing with Josh. I think he just zones out. Dante, I mean, in his head, he probably was like, this is my home. I'm here. This is good to go. Like, I'm going to listen to whatever and do whatever. Isaiah Hartenstein, this is the first real contract he got. And also, like, he is actually great at drop. So for him, it's like, all right, all of this makes sense to me. And obviously, Tibbs did give him a little bit more agency as time went on in terms of what he could do offensively. But I think what I would guess is there is a sense of like, this roster has turned over a lot. These are not all guys that are just gonna be good soldiers constantly and actually like. And also, like, I don't know. I watch them play and I'm like, I don't think they're not. I think they are executing the scheme a lot of the time. I don't know. Like, I think they are executing the scheme a lot of the time, and the Knicks are just really predictable. And the best teams anyway, are going to eat up that predictability. Whereas, look, when you're playing, let's say, the middle of the NBA and definitely the lower third of the NBA, your talent can win you most of those games. But against the best teams, like, you can have better talent, maybe even. But like, if you don't change things up and they know what to expect offensively, defensively, right? They can eat that stuff up. So look, I'm not saying that there's some mutiny going on in the locker room. I don't think it looks like that. But are there guys who are maybe a little bit more side-eyeing some of the choices Tibbs are making? Yeah, I think so.
And it's also, it can make the difference maybe between just all out effort every game, right? The buy-in that Tibbs had maybe year one.
Even last year.
Yeah. I mean, you see it with a guy like OG, right? He brought it every night last year. It has been a little bit different, but he's also not backed up by Hartenstein this time or Mitch. But he didn't get to play much with Mitch until the playoffs, right? It's the difference, though, between I think that I'm going to bust my ass because I believe we have a chance in every game versus, like, if you're like, okay, I know that I have responsibility, I'm going to play hard, but if you just don't think your team is being put in the best position to succeed, it's that little difference between I'm all in, gun go, like, let's do this, to like, I'm going to do my job, but what happens.
Yeah, I think that's a lot of what it is. And I think there's more frustration. Like, a guy like Mikal Bridges is rightfully, like, I understand. I think the frustration for him is twofold, where it's, you're asking me to do all of this shit defensively, and then offensively, you don't give me anything to do, really. Like, I'm not focused for you offensively. I'm basically being told to figure it out. And like, now with Brunson out, he is more of a focus, and you are seeing that he's able to do a bit more with the ball than maybe we thought at times. And I'm not saying he's the most dynamic creator, but like, what, he had 9 assists yesterday. I want to see. Let's see how many assists Mikal Bridges has averaged. I want to just look at his averages since Brunson went out, and we know that it's not some massive sample here. But okay, since Brunson has gone out, this is what he is putting up here. So Brunson left the Lakers game, and since then, this is now 10 games. In 10 games, He is 56% from the field, 38% from three. He needs to get that volume of just 4.2 attempts per game. 61.4 EFG. He is getting to the free throw line. 3.7 free throw attempts per game, by the way, since then. Skyrocketing.
From like 3.7 attempts for the season.
Yeah, but it's
yeah,
real,
that's also not just, I mean, that's good.
And,
We'll take that.
And this is what he's averaging. He's actually playing just 36 and a half minutes per game, which is actually down from his total or his regular season average in total. He's averaging 21.2 points, 5.0 assists, 3.8 rebounds per game. And his splits are, again, 55.9, 38.1, 91.9. Like, you're trying to tell me that if he can do that without Brunson, then your job as a coach is to figure out how do I get the best version. I'm not saying he needs to average 21 points a game when Brunson's back, but how do I get the same version of this player? How do I get this aggression? How do I utilize these skills he has with Brunson back? And that attempt has not been made throughout the season. And then on top of that, you're having him do yeoman's work on the other side of the floor where you're like, hey, you're going to defend point of attack 7,000 times per game, and we're going to play drop, and that's going to be with Cat, by the way, who's a terrible drop defender. So your job is to do that, and then you don't get anything offensive. I'm not going to give you anything offensively because I'm like, I need to preserve you for the defensive end of the floor. How is that remotely fun for him? And at some point as a player, you're going to be like, I'm sorry, I'm done with this. Like, I'm not. I'm going to do my job, and I'm going to do it to the best of my ability. But am I going to be maxing the fuck out constantly? Maybe not. And I think he's right to be frustrated at times. Like, I'm sorry. I can't believe this because prior to Mikal Bridges being on the Knicks, I was like, this guy, he's a fucking loser. But like, we can like leave the fucking did they trade too many picks debate in the past and just think about it as it is. And like, do you think that Tibbs is getting the best version of Mikal Bridges? I absolutely do not. Or has an aggregate. I think the version we're getting right now without Brunson's closer to it. And it just goes back to the point I'm making. Like, he seems more hell-bent. Like, he's so focused on, I need to make this starting five that I have in my head as the best starting five. That has to work, and all I'm focusing on is making that work, even though I'm not really trying anything different. It doesn't look like most of the time. And I'm so focused on that I'm not even considering, like, okay, but think, like, if your fucking front office trade 5 picks for a guy, I think they're telling you something. They're probably telling you, like, hey, we think this guy's really fucking good, and he needs to be a priority for you as a coach to figure out how to get the best version out of him. If that version, the best version of him, doesn't involve playing 90% of his minutes next to Josh Hart, that's something to consider. And it's like, maybe it's, it could be any variety of things. I don't want to just make it about Josh Hart. Like, it could be any variety of things. Maybe it's about pulling him the first of the starters, and then you throw him back in at the end of the first quarter when the bench guys start coming in, then that becomes his time to shine or whatever. Like, but those attempts are not there. There's nothing there that you are doing that has been done to prioritize him as a player. And then again, you're asking him to do the most thankless fucking shit defensively. Like, there's a limit to that. Like, I think a guy like OG Anunoby, he's been on a championship roster. Like, I think he can probably look at, like, he probably sees stuff defensively and he's like, that just doesn't make any sense. And I actually think, especially of late again, he's been playing really hard defensively, but there are times where he's almost I think he's trying to do too much because he's like, if I don't do this, then, who is going to stop them? They're going to score. And you saw it yesterday, right? He gambled. He left Kawhi in the corner to go double Ben Simmons for no fucking reason. And then Kawhi gets an open corner 3 out of it. And it's like, that's a stupid play, but it almost feels like a play you're making out of desperation, right? Where you're like, I have to do this myself. And so, like, I would say, like, there's probably a lot of that stuff going on too, where you're like, there are guys who are trying to do it individually because they don't trust the scheme. Like, they don't trust their coach. They don't trust that the coach is necessarily putting them in the best positions to win. So they feel they have to play above the scheme, outside of scheme. And, that can be a talent. That is a talent. being able to play above scheme, outside of scheme, is a thing that is important for the best teams, your best players on either
And
end of the
OG
floor.
has shown that he's capable of that too,
Right,
by the way.
for sure, for sure. But it's when it happens, like I feel like you're seeing it happen way too often with multiple guys, and that to me is either a function of a poor system or the consequence of guys not trusting the system or the scheme to deliver results unto itself, right? Like we don't trust that the coverage we have here is good enough to get stops. So I have to gamble, I have to do this, I have to do that to try to make it happen. And I don't know. I just think there's again, it's boring to talk about this because this is all we ever fucking talk about now. But I don't know what else there is really to discuss. Like what am I going to discuss? I'm going to discuss Josh Hart isn't a good fit in the starting lineup because he can't shoot. We already know that.
Well,
But
I mean, you were talking about Bridges, right? And kind of playing him. So he's played 1,574 minutes with Josh Hart on and McBride off, right? So that is pretty much the starting lineup. Those are most of those minutes. 2.73 net rating. When all three of those guys share the floor, that's the next most common iteration of those three. 538 minutes, 8.77 net rating. When Bridges and McBride share the floor, 417 minutes, you can say, probably that there's some selection bias there in terms of kind of lineups they're used again. That lineup has 112.87 net rating. It's actually the worst. It is only 118 offensive rating, but the defense is incredible, 106.05. And I think to your point, you mentioned that Bridges doesn't get to play maybe the ideal role he'd want on offense. On defense, he's not playing a great. He probably wants to say, "Hey, look, I'm happy to switch and defend the point of attack. I take pride in that, but I'm running through screens. I don't really get the the benefit of like just ISO defense and like the wing or something, and I don't get to pop passing lanes, right? And create steals and get those numbers up and get into transitions.
Also, my defensive backstop fucking sucks. Like you're having Cat play drop. That's the guy I'm depending on the other side of this defensive coverage you're having me do.
Yeah, and McBride frees him up, right? If Hart had been playing better point of attack defense, I think this becomes even less of an issue, right? That starting lineup still has a pretty great offensive rating, but McBride allows Bridges to not have to play the point of attack. So I think, yeah, to your point, maybe it's bringing him off first. Maybe instead of everyone talks about substituting McBride for Josh Hart, maybe it is bring McBride in early with like 6 minutes left, and like Bridges come back with him with the bench, right? And stop. Don't worry so much about the size thing. We know McBride, unless they're, unless it's like one of these, unless he's guarding SGA or Cade or Jaylen Brown. The size isn't going to be that much of an issue for him. But I did think those are interesting because previously I think the case had been that really you should be putting McBride in the starting lineup in place of Bridges. But actually those two have had a better net rating together. And yeah, Hart and McBride without Bridges is still a good lineup, 8.03 net rating, but it's not as good as the Bridges with McBride. And most of the majority of those minutes, though, overall that the Knicks have played, it's that starting lineup. And I get playing them; they're going to have to win, but you're mixing and matching and finding different things that work just make you tougher to defend, especially when there's some data that points to it. And you can still be judicious about it, but we've talked a lot about it, and yeah, I mean. Again, I don't think he's lost the locker room. I don't think you're suggesting that, right? Even like a guy like Mikal Bridges is probably not going to outwardly badmouth Tibbs or anything like that. And you're not going to, but I think the other thing is as a team, it's interesting, right? Because you have these games against these top 2 or 3 teams where they're just getting blown out of the water, right? You have games against, lesser teams where they just shit the bed, right? They got blown out by San Antonio. Even when Brunson was healthy, there were some questionable games. They go down to the wire with Charlotte. They've lost to Detroit. I mean, Detroit is a good team, but still, they've looked a lot worse than you'd expect. And the Bulls have they've struggled with. A lot of these lesser teams, right? They take a half, they play down. It's just natural, right? Every team does that, but that's been a little bit uncharacteristic, right? But they do tend to play down to their competition. And then sometimes you see a game like last night. Look, they lost the Clippers. Eventually, it became uncompetitive. But they come out red hot. They played really great for a half, I think. And the second night of a back-to-back, all those things. But you see that, like, and we've seen it, like, when they don't play those top 2 or 3 teams, they've actually been pretty great. They've played the Lakers tough. They've played the Warriors tough without Brunson. They've blown out the Grizzlies and the Nuggets. They played pretty well against Minnesota when at full strength. And they blew out Minnesota at full strength. So it seems like they play down against the worst. That's the thing, right? People are like, we can't be the top teams, but we also lose a lot of games we shouldn't. The games where they've played their best are like where they're evenly matched. Those are the games they get up for. I think they get up for the Boston games. It just doesn't matter because they're not playing the same.
They're deployed. They're deployed in the fucking stupidest fucking way possible against Boston. So,
but I think what Concise with saying, I see it show up where like that night to night effort, which was unrelenting the last couple of years, or at least relative to the rest of the league. Everyone has a bad night here and there, but like that has been. It's not like they mail it in, but they play a little bit more down to the competition. You don't see the same level of night to night commitment that Tibbs has typically gotten in his tenure with the Knicks.
Yeah, I don't think they've quit. I do think that there's less. I'm gonna die for the cause stuff going on.
At least in like a random regular season game against like San Antonio or something, right?
Right. Maybe they're gonna dial it up for the playoffs, but until that happens, we can't know that for sure.
And to be clear, that to me means I'm comfortable. I'm not worried about Detroit the same way other people are. I think they will dial it up for a series like that. But to your point, I also don't think it'll matter. I think they'll dial up against Cleveland or Boston. It won't matter. So,
right, you're not preparing. What's the saying? If you fail to prepare,
you're preparing to fail.
Yeah, preparing to fail. Me in college. But yeah, I mean, it's what it is. The season is where it's at. Hopefully, it would be nice for them to win 5 more games minimum. Get the 50 wins, back-to-back 50 would be nice. I think Jonathan Macri had in his newsletter yesterday, this is the first time the Knicks have won 45 games plus in 3 consecutive seasons since the 90s. So I think it's also the 3rd time in the franchise history they've done that. So, I've tried really hard to get to not focus on the negatives throughout the season, and I feel like that's been increasingly hard to do. But some of these positives are worth noting. And look, I'll just say this: I'll wrap on this, but like my main belief is like I think that they need a coaching change, and I am still pretty in on this roster. I do not think they're getting the best version of it. I do not think they're really tapping into things that could give them a higher ceiling, both schematically and rotationally. And I would like to see this roster in a different pair of hands. Now, look, is that a risk? Because Tibbs does give you a certain floor. Like I don't think that's too deniable at this point. Like even in his disaster seasons, right, as a coach, we're talking about a 45-27 team right now, and then a team in 2021-22 that was like, look, they missed the playoffs, but they were 37-45. I think their Pythagorean win-loss that year was actually
41 or something.
Yeah, 41 or 42. Like they blew a ton of close games that year in stupid ways. So
some
like
of that is luck, right? I mean, the whole
right.
point of Pythagorean is like you wouldn't expect that to happen over a longer sample, but yeah,
right. So like I think there's the floor that he gives you is a real thing, and it is a risk to move on from him in that sense because I mean, look, we saw what happened in Chicago, we saw what happened in Minnesota for a long time after he left. Like, there's definite potential that like if you get the hire wrong, the team is stagnant or worse, and that's definitely
did
a
Minnesota
real risk.
go straight to
But
Finch?
I think when you're this, no, they had like Ryan Saunders and
Oh,
shit
okay.
in between.
So I do think Finch has been really
But
good for them. So
like,
yeah, sorry.
yeah, Finch has been good. Finch has been good. But like, I just think that when you're this pot committed, I don't think you can't be cautious in that sense. Like, you need to take a chance, and that chance can't always be personnel moves. Like, you also really have to consider, like, is the coach getting the most out of this personnel? And again, as we've talked about throughout this podcast, I don't really see the argument for that. I really don't. If somebody wants to make the argument, feel free to do that in the Discord or at me on Twitter. And I'm willing to hear it out. But I think it's time to move on, and that's where I stand right now. The Knicks don't have to
We
make the
can
squad
add
till after
them.
the season.
We can add them to the Strickland Signal chat where we discuss all of our high level plans and strategy, so they can get a sneak preview.
Yeah, that's where we make sure to lay
All our
out our
attack
best.
plans. All our attack
Oh
plans
yeah,
for the pod.
yep, our attack plans. But yeah, like I just the Knicks don't have to make and they shouldn't. They obviously be insane to fire him now, and I didn't think they should really ever fire him during the season or would fire him during the season. So they have the rest of the regular season to evaluate, and then they have the playoffs to evaluate. Now, again, I'm not expecting great things in the playoffs. I'm actually pretty concerned. But if you go into the playoffs, you win a first round series, and you're really competitive against Cleveland or Boston, like, yeah, then I think it's a different conversation. But based on the evidence I have in front of me today, that's how I feel. I just think that it's time to get a new voice in there, and that this guy is not going to be the one to get them over the hump or maximize this group of players. And
So hold on. Let me pause there. So I think if they lose to Detroit, Indiana, or Milwaukee first round, you're done with Tibbs, right? Correct.
as it stands right now, yeah.
And then if they win that but get absolutely smoked by Cleveland or Boston, you'd also be out in that case. Because I think
Yeah, out. I'm out. Yeah,
so.
totally out.
In
Totally
order
out.
for Tibbs to do you think? See, I think the front office would still, if he makes the second round, I don't think he gets fired. I think it becomes a very real possibility if they crash out on the first. But I think where you're probably a little bit further along is like, even if they get swept by Boston or Cleveland, the front office is going to say these are historically good teams. Like, that's understandable. And he just started a 3-year extension, but that probably puts him on a hotter seat.
I mean, if that's their stance, that's their stance. I think it's bullshit. Like, oh, you have to beat you have to beat a historically great team. Wow, it's almost like that's part of winning an NBA championship. That's fucking crazy, dude. Like, holy shit, you have to beat a historically great team. Why don't you try to be a historically great team? Maybe that should be the goal, right? So I think that would be a cop out. And then the other part, like, they could get swept by Boston, right? But let's say each game is like right down to the wire and you're right fucking there, and it's just, every big swing just kind of runs in their favor. In that scenario, I would be like, okay, that's really impressive, actually. Like, keep them around, right? Like, that actually would be impressive to me. So it's not just like the series score; it's how the series plays out, right? I'm sure we all remember the year that Toronto they played, uh, you know, one of the years where they lost to LeBron in the playoffs, but it was like a 4-2 series in the conference finals. But there was no point in that series where you were like, "Oh man, the Cavs might lose this one." Like, it was not a competitive series. So like, you can extend it to 6 games, and look, majority of times if it's a 6-game series, it actually was competitive. But you have, like, this is what I mean. Like, I'm saying what I feel right now, that I'm open to that changing by the end of the season, because I'm not advocating for him to be fired right this second. That would be asinine and serve absolutely no purpose. But like, there are scenarios where after the season I'm okay with keeping him, and then there are scenarios after the season where most scenarios as it stands right now where I'm like, that I imagine are possible, that I'm like, yeah, it's time to go, buddy. Like, I don't see it, and I'm sorry. Like, thank you for your service, and I'm happy you got your contract extension. That shit's guaranteed, so you can enjoy your fucking retirement. But like, it's over. Like, it's time to go, and that's fine. Like, that's part of every NBA team's cycles. Like, I don't know, firing coaches to me is, yeah, it's tough, but it's part of the fucking job, and it's a big
Yeah,
part of the job.
I mean, I mean, you look going back, right? So Boston, they didn't fire their coach, but they hired Brad Stevens and then they elevated him to front office, right? You look at Golden State, obviously, right? Mark Jackson helped build the culture, and they had to move on, right? Um, San Antonio actually, it's funny because Popovich actually was originally in front office and then took over as coach. Although now you can say that's a little bit different. Obviously, the Bulls, they were competitive with Doug Collins, hired Phil Jackson, right? So I think that, again, I think people struggle with, like, you can definitely think that Tibbs is a great guy who deserves a lot of credit, and that a change would still be necessary for when you're in a, it's like, it's not the same thing, but there's peacetime consigliere and wartime consigliere. There is a foundation, maybe, coach, and there are get you over the top coaches. And he has a chance to, I think, evolve and still be that. No one questions, I think, his basketball intelligence. But these are the conversations that are definitely going to. It looks like we're headed down that path, unless things change, and maybe they will. I mean, I think during this time, having to navigate life without Brunson, if suddenly when he comes back, those changes stick, maybe this team does have a little bit more ceiling this year, right? Maybe that's the key to making things competitive, stealing a game or two against Cleveland. If you can keep those changes, because they've, without Brunson, they have treaded water, right? They've had some ugly losses. Also, I mean, if I told you before the game they'd be competitive into the fourth against the Clippers without Brunson yesterday and with like all their guards getting hurt, probably would be like, all right, that's fine. So I don't think it's over by any means for this team. And I do think, like, potentially this stretch without Brunson can help. And that'd be something I would look at in the playoff process too. It's like, now that Bridges is more comfortable, the same way, by the way, when Hartenstein got more comfortable, he, was starting to do more things on offense. Even when Mitch came back and all of that, if those changes last, that speaks well to Tibbs, right? Eventually, maybe a challenging, I don't want to call it a challenging relationship, but maybe where they don't always see eye to eye, where you're able to come together and build that out. That is something he's been able to do in the past. And, those kind of things are worth looking at too, from a process perspective, even beyond just schematic changes. Out coaching Joe Mazzulla right now probably is unrealistic. But, can you, again, whether it's through, we've understood Tibbs is a guy who gets a lot out of his players because he emphasizes effort. Guys play hard for him. He gets along well with his guys. If he's able to do that, then that also makes the case. But if you're not getting that, and you're not getting kind of the ability to out scheme or to get more out of your talent, more than the sum of the parts based on scheme, if you can't get more than some of the parts with either scheme or with effort, you really have to think about that. And by the way, even if the Knicks make more moves or if they build a great roster, with how competitive the NBA is, they are going to eventually have to play above the sum of their. I don't think there's a team that's won purely just on talent. Everyone plays. Boston is a very talented team. They play above the sum of their parts. Oklahoma City is a very talented team. They're one of the greatest defenses ever. Cleveland was on. Cleveland before kind of tapering off a little bit was on 70 game win pace at one point, or 68. You're not winning the best you can do, especially with the CBA, I think, is to be like one of the top 2 or 3 teams in terms of talent, but on a pretty even footing, which maybe they're not yet. But even when they get to that spot, they're going to need someone who can elevate the roster. And maybe Tibbs can be that guy. But that is the question you need to be asking right now, not how much worse can it get, or look at everything he did for us. We acknowledge all of that. It could be a lot worse, and he has done a ton. If and when the Knicks story is told, he will be a big part of it. One of the best, I would say, one of the best Knicks coaches ever. After Holzman, he's up there with Van Gundy, Riley, I would say, in terms of just how, what he was taking over. But the questions we raised still hold. So,
yep. I think that's all accurate and fair. All right. That's a good place to end this. Stacy, let the people know they can find you and plug anything you'd like to plug.
You can find me at Stacy Patton 89. I'll plug all the work at the Strickland.
Awesome. I will also plug all the work at Strickland. Check out the pods, check out the post games, check out the recaps. They've been doing a really good job with all those things. All right, that is our show for today. I hope everybody enjoys the rest of their week. The Knicks play the Bucks on Friday night in a battle of two injury, two teams beaten down by injuries. Also, kind of a key game for both teams in a lot of ways. So we'll see what happens there. All right, that is our show for today. Thank you to our sponsor, Ben and Line, and I'll see you on Friday. Peace.